Welcome to the Book Studio. I'm your host, Beth Ann Patrick, and today I'm delighted to have Chris Bohjalian back in the guest seat with Secrets of Eden, his new novel from Shea Earhart. Chris, thank you for joining me again.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me
It's
on.
really wonderful. And I wanted to start by talking about your title, Secrets of Eden, and when you knew it was right for the book. But I think first we need to show the new title of the book, the alternate title.
Sure.
Would you?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed is for the first time in 20 years, last year the number of American adults who read at least one novel actually increased.
Which is great news.
It is. And for that we can thank certainly a whole lot of teenage vampires.
Yeah, there you go.
Which has gotten a lot of people reading and a lot of novelists thinking, which is why I'm so excited to introduce Vampires of Eden.
Vampires of Eden, the sequel. Excellent. Well, you know, Secrets of Eden is on its own a pretty darn great title. So when did you know this was right for the book? When did you know this was your title?
I was editing the manuscript yet again. As Gabriel Garcia Marquez says, the only reason writers publish is to stop rewriting. And I'd been toying with a lot of other titles, and I came across a scene where the Reverend Stephen Drew and his lover Heather Laurent are in bed together, and they're in Heather's loft in New York City, and all of a sudden he's thinking to himself, there were no secrets in Eden, and he's deconstructing a few passages in Genesis in his mind when Adam and Eve are waiting to be discovered. And that's when I thought, you know, every character in this book seems to have a secret. Every character in this book is shouldering a burden they don't want to share. Let's call it Secrets of Eden.
And it really is an Eden in its own way. You know, it's way up there in Vermont, and it's supposed to be so idyllic, yet there are so many dark secrets in there. How about what this signifies to you? I know you talked about it being something with the secrets, but the other things that come up to you when you hear the title.
Oh, sure. You're absolutely right. We have this notion that Vermont is an idyllic pastoral throwback. We think of three things: foliage, maple syrup, and Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Right.
Vermont is the bed and breakfast destination getaway for every NBC sitcom.
For leaf peepers.
Ever. But here's the reality about Vermont. We're a microcosm for the staggering indifference that much of the country has towards sexual violence and domestic abuse. And it is even more common in Vermont statistically than in the rest of the country.
That's frightening.
In 2008, there were 15 homicides in Vermont, and 11 were related directly to domestic violence.
And of course, your book has so much about what happens when people keep secrets and when households keep their curtains drawn. And this is really interesting. You said, one reviewer said, in fact, I think in USA Today, that this is really what it's like when the lights are off and the shades are drawn. And you're telling the truth about what's behind those doors. Was this a dark place for you when you were writing it?
Some of the research was dark when I was interviewing women who've escaped abusive relationships, when I was spending time talking to victims' rights advocates. But the thing that I found when I was actually writing the book is I had as much fun writing this book as any of my books. I enjoyed immensely hanging around with Stephen Drew and Heather Laurent and Catherine Benincasa. I think some of the characters have got a pretty good sense of humor and are what they lack in self-knowledge, what they lack in perhaps reliability, I think they make up for with a good sense of humor, and I enjoyed hanging with them.
That's a very interesting thing, because you have constructed this around a sort of literary device, which I won't name because we try to keep as many spoilers out of it as possible. But I was wondering what kind of challenge that offered to you. Is that a challenge? It sounds like it's a challenge you took up happily.
I did. The thing about having narrators who are not completely reliable is they can't actually lie to the reader. That's not fair. Then the book is just a parlor trick. What you want to do is have narrators who keep their cards close to their chest and don't quite reveal everything.
So that's what we have with so many characters in the book. But a lot of the characters are female too. And your female characters are famous. You have lots of them that are very strong. And I was wondering if we could talk about how they all relate. Each of them relates to Eve. Since this is Secrets of Eden, you've got Catherine Benincasa, Heather Laurent, Katie, and so on.
You know, in some ways, and it's interesting you should bring that up, I've never related them to Eve. I think it's a lovely question, because when I think of Eve, I think of the metaphoric woman and sort of seductress who convinces Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge after she has and is being willfully disobedient. I don't necessarily view any of these three women as willfully disobedient. What I view them as in some cases, women who think they know more than they do, and in other cases, know a certain amount and are willing to protect people.
That's a very interesting observation because there is so much about being protective going on in here on the spiritual plane, the physical plane, the emotional plane. And one of the things I want to say is that people are relating to it clearly, Chris, because you're at number 6 coming up on the New York Times bestseller list. And that is fantastic news. So I know that means people are going to want to know what comes next. And I also want to ask about your previous novel, Skeletons at the Feast, because I understand you may be working on a sequel.
At some point, I definitely want to write a sequel to Skeletons at the Feast. I don't want to reveal the last sentence of that book for people who haven't read it.
Right.
But if you look at the last sentence of Skeletons at the Feast, you will see the only time in my life I have set myself up by design for a sequel. And that would be a book set in 1948 in the Israeli War for Independence.
Very, very exciting. Is that what you're working on now?
No. Nope. I'm right now working on a book about commercial aviation and witches. It's about an airline pilot in the post-Sully Sullenberger era who has to ditch his jet in Lake Champlain after double engine failure, but things don't work out as well for him as they did for Sully Sullenberger. There are fatalities and drownings. And so he and his wife and their twin daughters retreat to a house in northern Vermont to rebuild their lives. And it's the kind of village and the kind of house that has, well, a history. And when he's trying desperately to explain the strange goings-on that he's witnessing when he's home alone, people kind of pat him on the shoulder and say, it's PTSD. You'll be fine.
But it's really something else.
I think it is.
And when are we going to see that one, Chris?
Probably 2012. I think that if I produce a new book every other year, that seems to work well for my readers.
Very exciting. I'm looking forward to that one. So right now we've got Secrets of Eden from Shea Earhart by Chris Bohjalian. And Chris, thanks again for being another time guest on the Book Studio. Really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. You're welcome. Join us next time on the Book Studio.